Okay, good afternoon, everyone.
Hey.
Welcome to today's Zoom tour and talk for the exhibition Familiar Faces. It's featuring the artwork of Charles Cooper, Phyllis Gellmin Laver, Gilbert Lewis, Ryan Muldowney, and Mickayel Thurin. So we're very excited for the show. It's a fantastic grouping. If you're able, you can come and see the show in person. We are open Wednesday through Friday, 10 to 6, and Saturday and Sunday, 12 to 6. And everything is also available on our website. And at some point, I will put that link in the chat so you can check it out. So we are going to tour the exhibition and then stop at segments of the walls and have the artists speak about their work. So I'd ask that the audience would hold their questions to the end, but the artists can feel free to interject. Let's see. What's that? Yes, and you want to please stay muted, except for the artists, because we pick up your background noise. And we are recording this, so we will be posting it on our website after the fact so you can have another look at it. And I'm going to spotlight Tina's video, if I can find it. Ah, yes. Oops. Okay, so now you should be seeing the gallery space proper. And Tina's going to, so we're lifting off now to our first grouping, which features 2 Gilbert Lewis watercolors and 2 Charles Cooper oil paintings. Charles, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, Charles.
Hi.
Can you speak about these are 2 oils, correct?
Yes. Well, I'm not sure what to say. The work is work that I did a while ago, like maybe around 2014, 2015. The work is dealing with sort of metaphorical sort of journey, I guess, in a way, from I was going through a kind of period of grief. I had lost my wife a while back, and I was trying to talk about some of the experiences I was going through. So that one with the dog, it actually was inspired by a dream, but it came from that period when I was going through that grief. And the idea was that you're looking at kind of 2 states of reality, and in the present is kind of like the emotional sort of turmoil I was kind of going through and kind of reaching out for, finding a direction. And then the background is kind of like another reality where it's almost like the idea of like Dante's Inferno, where the dog is kind of like guiding through this kind of this this realm, that is only could be described at the time as a kind of maybe hell I was going through, trying to find my way out of grief. So it's very autobiographical, it's metaphorical in that way, and this a lot of symbolism, like the dog was kind of like the idea of faith, and that there's a way out of this, there's a way to grow out of this sort of situation. So it's about kind of psychological state. The other one is just I work a lot with portraiture and self portraits. I kind of see it, and I'm not. I can see where it could be interpreted as like kind of a narcissist, but it's almost like it's just like a format I like to use, and a lot of artistic concerns and ideas are projected onto that format, the portrait. So I was like thinking about just ways of working with paint and the materiality of paint, and just trying to evoke a kind of psychology by the way that the presence or the face or the persona is evoked through the paint as well as through the imagery. I'm really into a lot of direct painting and mark making and a I don't know, the experience of looking at something as a representational image, but then also feeling it as an abstraction or an object, right? Where it's these elements of marks and lines and shapes, and they apply to a physical surface. So I play a lot with that kind of contrast in the work as well.
Thank you, Charles.
Yep.
Unfortunately, Gilbert Lewis is not able to be here with us today, but Bill Scott is here to talk a little bit about Gilbert and his work. Hey, Bill.
Yeah. I probably a lot of you knew Gilbert. He has Alzheimer's and just doesn't recognize anyone anymore. But he's somebody who I knew for about 40 years, and I loved his work. The first time I saw his work was, I think a show of his work anyways, was at Noah Butcher, when she did a show that included this picture that's in the show on the card. And he always worked in art supply stores and was also an art therapist for senior citizens. And he painted a lot of young men, many gay young men, but not exclusively. And sort of that moment between being a teenager and an adult, sort of, which is much more common for, I think, women to be painted at that age than for men. There was just a show of his work at Woodmere, and there's currently a show at the Academy. I got involved with Gilbert because I ran into him on the street one day, and I was at the bank machine and he was waiting, and I started talking to him, and he finally very politely said, "Excuse me, have we met?" And I said, "Yeah, I've met you in 1975 and I've known you ever since," but he didn't know who I was. So I started to check in on him because I found, like a lot of people, I don't, I didn't know his social circle. So I started to check in on him, and it took me a while to find out who else he knew, but I did meet his person who ended up having legal guardianship, who moved him, but I ended up storing all the artwork here and at my house, and it's been great. It was great to look through it while it was here. Now it's almost all gone, and I'm really happy that he's included in this exhibition, which is really a wonderful exhibition. I went over to see it the other day, and I love Mika Thurin's work. And Charles Cooper, I never saw your work before, but I think it's gorgeous. The drawings and the paintings.
Thank you.
I want to come back and look at it again, because every time I go into an indoor space, I'm terrified to stay there very long, even though there's lots of space at Cerulean to be distanced. And it's nice to see Bill and Mary. I haven't seen you in about a century and a half, I think. But I still remember you. So I don't know what else to say, but if I think of something else later, can I interrupt?
Yes, of course. It's more of a free form event.
Yeah, I mean, everything, and to see Ryan's work after all these years, I hadn't seen his work for a long time either.
Yes, it's Old Home Week here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So Mika, we have your painting here, Dead Center. Would you like to speak about it?
Yeah. So this painting is called either Maurice and Daddy or Momo and Daddy. It's a painting of my son, who at the time was probably 5 or 6, something of that, and my husband, who's holding him. And they were both, fully confident in their underwear. We have an art studio downstairs from our apartment, and yeah, they were sitting like that already when I had like happened upon them. And, you know, my son, he'll just kind of come and set up shop, no matter what you're doing. And I found that like my son, whenever he's with my husband, he kind of grants my husband the ability to kind of showcase a certain level of like vulnerability and, you know, just like a clean kind of love that he doesn't often like express outside of, you know, that relationship, which is kind of cool. It always kind of amazed me. So I wanted to paint that and capture it. So I tend to do a lot of portraits of the two of them because they're always around. And kind of as Charles said, you know, I do a lot of self-portraits as well. And I don't think it's coming from like a place of vanity or anything. It's just kind of like you're there. And I find painting subjects that I am familiar with, that I see all the time, it kind of allows you to make a painting that's more about the process. And you can, you know, kind of focus more on like the, you know, the balance, the composition, the texture, how like the pigments or the different media that you're using, how they react. And you're not so much focused on the sitter, which, so that's why I often enjoy painting my family. So yeah, so that's a little bit about that painting.
Are you working directly, or how do you?
Yes. So I work directly. Generally when somebody sits for me, I get distracted pretty easily. So I'll paint for, you know, maybe an hour or two at a time before moving on to something else. And I tend to work with acrylics because they dry quickly. I'm a little impatient for oils. I also like to do mixed medium. So acrylic kind of lets me do that. And even with acrylics, sometimes you'll catch me with like a blow dryer or something to speed it up. But yeah, I generally will have the person sitting for me right there. I let them move around because, you know, obviously my paintings aren't the most realistic. And so, you know, if I try to respond from the painting itself for what it wants to become. So I don't generally stick to like, you know, if somebody starts out sitting in a certain way that they're comfortable, I'll allow them to move and whatnot, and we'll be talking the whole time. And then, you know, if sometimes in some of my paintings, somebody will have like multiple arms or multiple noses. And if that works for the painting, fine. But if it doesn't, you know, I may ask them then like, hey, can you rotate just a little bit? Because it's kind of just me reacting in that moment to the painting to see what it needs.
Thank you, Mika.
Mm-hmm.
And Phyllis, we have one of your drawings now.
Right. Okay. Things that Mika said and Charles said are foremost in my mind. And before I go into this, I want to say that I also think of the figure as a format or as content or as the host to make the drawing. And I've always found the human being to be the content that I want to work from to make my marks. So I work from actual people in front of me almost 100% of the time. And the people I work from come from two groups. Either they're friends who then become models, or they're models who then become friends. And if it's not either of those two groups, if something isn't happening when I work from someone, then I'll do it once or twice and stop. So this is a friend of mine who I first worked from a few years ago. She sat with her husband. And then during the pandemic, we were speaking and she was willing to come and sit for me. And we both felt that we're not seeing other people. She is a writer, and it's even more solitary than what I do because I work for models. So we both weren't around other people, and Christine came to me many times, and which I appreciated so much, and we worked. So the pieces that are in this show now, I changed my size. I went to a square, and which I found like an astonishing thing to do. I've been moving toward it for a while, and I found the shape compositionally so exciting. So I've changed to that for the time being, and I'm really enjoying working in that system of the square. One other point before you move on, though, I'd like to say that this model, my friend Christine, I call this piece Thinking of Never Been. And Never Been was the character in a book that Christine just had released in the fall, the definition of Never Been, and which is for young adults, but I read it and loved it. So just thought I'd mention that because you would never know what the title meant otherwise.
Thank you, Phyllis. Okay. So we have two more pieces by Charles, two drawings this time.
Yeah, with these two, these are kind of very recent. Actually, the one you're looking at now, I just finished maybe a month ago. And usually when I work in a really odd way. I mean, I'm very process oriented. So I'll do a lot of sketching. I might think of an idea as a motif, like a particular kind of compositional arrangement with a, you know, elements, figures in it. And then I'll do so many drawings of that, almost trying to, I think of it as like evoke the dream, you know, through so many iterations. Things can well up or swell up over time in terms of, you know, kind of unconscious things that maybe I'm projecting into the idea. By working in so many multiples, it starts to come out. And I'm also looking for a kind of almost like an archetypal gesture, a kind of presence that the figure may have that would be almost immediately recognizable, you know, in terms of what it may convey. But I also like to play a kind of ambiguity too, in a way that it may suggest multiple things, but it often has a kind of familiarity. So I like that idea, and I'm always looking for it. Sometimes when I walk around and see family members in a certain pose or gesture, it kind of provokes that idea in me that I'm looking at something that has a kind of presence beyond just the sort of immediate moment, just by what it triggers in me. And I often would run and take a picture of that. And another drawing is kind of based on one of those moments, Michael's dream, when we get to it. But I was also incorporating working with the computer. I bring the images in, I manipulate and layer and adjust. And eventually I come to a moment where I feel like, you know, the idea has coalesced, and then I'll just kind of, you know, finish off the drawing. So it's a long process sometimes for me. With this one, again, a lot of symbolism because, you know, I kind of play with narrative a little bit. It's a bit ambiguous, but I include a lot of symbolic objects. Like that vase, my sister, she was a veteran. She served in the Gulf War, and they had shipped her home, but she had stopped in Italy and picked up this vase for me, and she gave it to me. And I don't know, and she was a very reclusive person. Somehow the vase became a stand-in for her, and I include it in a lot of my work. And unfortunately, she actually passed away, my baby sister, well, I'd say a year and a half ago. And so it only made the vase even more meaningful for me. So it's almost like her avatar. So, I mean, that's a kind of personal note that others probably would pick up on. But I try to give all the objects, or at least think of them as resonating with some sort of deeper meaning, as opposed to just like props in a still life. So, and again, it plays into that idea of a kind of ambiguous narrative. And this one on the right, a lot of times too, I look a lot at archaic sculpture. I look a lot at African sculpture. I look at children's art, outsider art, comics. There's a lot of different sorts of inspiration that sort of fuses into the work. And so I was also thinking about religious painting, you know, in a way that the bird is almost like the idea of the Annunciation, sort of the winged creature, sort of visitation with some sort of announcement. So birds and dogs often, almost like mythological characters, appear in my drawings a lot. And again, it's that idea of there's a kind of suggestion of a narrative without it being explicit.
Thank you, Charles.
Yep.
So we have a Gilbert Lewis on the left, two Ryan Muldowney's in the middle, and a Mickayel Thurin on the right. So Ryan, would you like to speak about your two pieces?
Sure. So the piece on the top is a portrait of my wife. The piece on the bottom is a portrait of one of my many brothers. And while a number of my pieces in the show are sort of connected to different sets of ideas, kind of exploring the potential of I guess, my family members and loved ones. You know, these two in particular are maybe a little bit colder. They're a little bit more using my family as raw materials for my, you know, kind of formal exploration. And I think an overarching sort of idea that you can see in my work in this show, and I think elsewhere, is this idea that, you know, a lot of times, you know, I'm an educator, and a lot of times young students are very fascinated with the idea of creating illusion in their work, you know, trying to make something as naturalistic or as realistic as possible. And for a lot of young, inexperienced students, that's kind of the gold standard for excellence. And, you know, and it occurs to me, having, you know, being a student of art history, that, you know, what makes great art great often is this idea of interruption, that there's some quality or some component that breaks the illusion, that sort of opens up space for the viewer to kind of inhabit this, the image without everything being said by the artist. And so, you know, my work, I'm less about making statements, and I'm more about, I guess, asking questions, or at least setting the stage where someone could come and ask questions. And so, you know, in these works, you can sort of see at least some evidence of these interruptions. I mean, the paintings are definitely based on, representational source material. But, you know, these sort of odd displacements that occur in the paintings, these, drawn lines over the surface that kind of help create sort of architectural structure to the head, but it also serves to kind of interrupt the illusion. These sort of shapes and colors that superimpose themselves over the face or behind the head, that could be suggestive of almost anything. Those also help, I think, to kind of create an extra, I guess, layer of interaction with the work. You know, I'm reminded of sort of early Christian and Byzantine work. There's something about their work moving away from naturalism and towards sort of more, maybe abstracted is not the right word, but sort of certainly less naturalistic forms. At least part of the reason for it was to sort of depict a spiritual realm, a realm that wasn't of this world. And it was kind of, I think, at least in part, a rejection of the classical culture's love of this world and naturalism. And so early Christian and Byzantine work sort of gets away from that, trying to depict the things of another world. And so, you know, that's what I like to have in my work is maybe a foot in both worlds. This idea of there's components that are recognizable that we can kind of attach to, but that there are also components in it that kind of confuse or mystify us and sort of give space for perhaps another dimension to the work. So that's kind of some of the things I was thinking about with these pieces.
You've titled these Seer.
Yeah, and so, you know, the idea of seer, and this is connected to, I guess, another body of work that I was dealing with in trying to represent family members as maybe being people of significance, but like people of potentially historical significance, prophets, martyrs, priests, kings, queens, seers, etc. And trying to kind of include little tokens in the imagery of these family members that kind of suggests this kind of this maybe role that that kind of would increase their significance. And so, you know, it seemed to me that for these ones that are that I titled Seer, that you know, the idea of how you see, all right, vision and things like that, seeing into the future or perhaps seeing into the past, or seeing things in a different way was kind of a big, big component of that. And so by kind of putting these, you know, these little circles over the eyes that feel like they don't belong with the sort of naturalistic components of the painting, they kind of suggest that there's an alternative, you know, like Byzantine work, maybe a spiritual dimension, this idea of being able to see beyond, you know, what normal people see. So that was definitely a component of these two pieces.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah.
So Mika, we have another one of your pieces. This is
Yeah.
yarn shirt.
Yes, and it's actually what looks like the shirt is actually yarn. It was a really cool yarn that I found that had this really rich texture. That when I do paintings and when I find like the paintings that I tend to be attracted to, like texture is a pretty big portion of that for me. So if you end up seeing the show in real life, this painting it's got a lot of that on there. So like I said, I like to work with a variety of mediums. I like to push contrast. I like to you know, play with space and things that, you know, you would normally, you know, your eyes want to do something and move towards a space, and then, you know, kind of like as Ryan said, like interrupt you know, that movement to get, you know, your eye to, you know, rotate around the picture and, you know, just kind of create interest, I guess. For me, I tend to find like the art that I spend time looking at, it's not generally the stuff that like when you look at it, you understand it all at once. I like to sit with it and maybe like see something different each time. And so that's kind of what I want to provide for people who are experiencing my art. So I do that by, you know, trying to do different things with the paint that's not necessarily what's expected, or using different materials as well. In this particular painting, I did initially have someone sitting for it, but then this is a painting that took me a long time to kind of come to a resolution about. So parts of it I use myself for reference. A lot of it's, you know, just through my imagination and just kind of working, you know, with the different colors and textures to kind of create, you know, this figure. What I liked about it was that this painting, it makes me kind of uncomfortable because I feel like there's a lot of emotion in it. But like I find that like people always tend to you know, be drawn to it, and I don't know, like I think when you're making artwork, it can sometimes and for me, I don't know if it's by accident or if it's purposeful, it can kind of capture like, you know, a sense of the person's, you know, emotion or feeling. And this was a painting that just it has a lot of that, and it kind of it's one that I, you know, it took me a while to even want to show or anything, just because for whatever reason it kind of it pushes those buttons for me. But yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, when I look at it, I feel somewhat like I'm being evaluated.
Yeah.
There's something
Yeah.
about the gesture of the figure that
Yeah,
makes me feel like I'm being appraised, and it's a little bit disconcerting.
it is. Yeah. Yeah. So, and for me too, this painting, it was a bit of a struggle doing it because for me, I kind of rely on figure as like the familiar, as you know, it's an easy excuse to get into the painting. Like I love abstract art. The longer that the longer I'm an artist, the more I'm kind of drawn to abstraction, as an interesting like subject to get into. But like figures, faces, portraits are kind of like the thing that I was initially passionate about. And that's for me when I make a painting, like I have a really hard time doing a painting when there's no subject, there's no, representational something to hold on to and, give you that excuse to do the painting. So this painting was kind of a little bit of a battle with that. Because, it's not about the subject, but at the same time, it is. So.
Thank you, Mika. So Phyllis, we have another one of your drawings here on the end wall.
Okay, well, I keep finding very interesting what's said before I'm getting my opportunity. So I do want to say, Mika, I'm glad you decided to show that piece. It is fascinating to look at. And talking about ways to bring people in, on this piece, I actually have the side of an arm and a hand cut off. And I think about that a lot in my work. I think back to Philip Perlstein, and in the 70s, he started coming very close to the figure and he would take off the top of the models' heads. And at the time, people were writing about it as though he committed some horrible act. But really, way back before him, Bonnard, who I loved, and probably most of you do also, was using the edge, and he was cutting people off at the edge, and the edge is very important to me. So in that piece, I feel like it's an entrance where that hand is cut off. It's another way to enter. And thinking about the edge also, actually on the other side, on the right-hand edge, is there these funny marks, which is the imprint of the paper manufacturer, Canson. And wherever it happens to be, I buy the paper in big rolls and spend hours and hours cutting it down, which is a horrible job, but I never cut off that edge. I love it. I just love that decorative edge. So I feel like this one is a lot about the edge and what's going on there.
You have tended to work quite large in the past, Phyllis. Like larger.
Right, yeah. I was working on sheets. Canson was cutting its paper to something approximately 40 inches by 30 inches and selling it pre-cut for many years. And then I think I was probably the only person in the world who was buying those packs of paper, and they stopped cutting it. It was a great size for me, and then I started cutting my paper myself to that size. So it gets to be unwieldy. It's very big to frame. It's very heavy. So I cut down from 40 by 30 to 30 by 30, as I said before, into the square format. And the hand is very much the same size. I'm just taking away some of the figure is really what's happened. And for the moment, I like the square very much. And I as I've looked over the show, I think there are a number of pieces that are either square or almost square, which I thought was interesting.
Thank you, Phyllis. So we're coming up on the other side of the gallery, and we have a large format Gilbert Lewis painting. This is a gouache, of which he was a real master of the medium. I mean, in advance of the show, we had this painting in the back, and every time I'd come in, I would sort of stare at it for a while because I found the figure very, very captivating. Bill, would you like to speak about this piece?
Sure. Yeah, it's really interesting hearing everyone talk about their work. And I realized, being the surrogate for Gilbert, I wasn't really addressing the types of things that you all are talking about. But I know that he met a lot of the people he painted weren't particularly people he knew very, very well, but he would meet them somewhere and he would propose that they pose for him. And he painted a lot of straightforward clothes portraits, and he painted a lot of nudes. And some of the guys who I met later who said they were going over to be painted, have their portrait painted, would be kind of aghast when they saw all the nudes and would be terrified that they would have to take their clothes off, which they didn't end up doing, but, or not always, but he would let them pick what they wanted to wear, and he would just talk to them and wait until they kind of settled into a pose. He wasn't telling them what to do. He wanted to see where they were, and if he liked them, he would invite them to bring music with them, like I guess a record in those days, or tape, and he would listen to the music they liked and talk about things. And they usually came for several sittings. He also painted a lot of portraits of older people. Most of them are owned by Woodmere, and a lot are owned by the people or the families of the people who he painted. And I always saw his paintings sort of in relation to Hockney's work, or maybe Alice Neal's work, and kind of a bridge for me between Alice Neal and Elizabeth Peyton, who's a younger painter. And I doubt he saw it that way at all. I think he saw them really as his tipping the hat to Italian Renaissance portraiture, like Piero, or to Messina, or you know, a lot of Italian painting. And he first went to Italy, I think in 66 or 67. He graduated from Papa in 67. And his roommates were Jody Pinto and Barbara Sawson. And the three of them went to Europe together, which I can't imagine what that was like. But they, you know, they all went on to have really good careers. Although Gilbert, you know, when I was in school, I was there after Gilbert by he's about 10 years older than I am. And we were always told not to exhibit our work publicly for 5 or 10 years out of school, because you weren't really painting your own pictures yet until then. And Gilbert took that to heart, and he didn't start showing his work, I think, in 1976, which would be 9 years out of school. He had some pictures up at a West Philadelphia restaurant called La Terrasse. And 2 years later, or 3 years later, he was in a show at Eric Mackler's gallery on Spruce Street. And, but he also was, and then I saw this picture in 1985 when he had a show at Noel Butcher's gallery, and it was on the invitation for the show. And he also, though, was, and this is probably the wrong thing to say, but I think he didn't show that very much, or as much as I would have thought he would, for the quality of his work, because I think he was pretty difficult to work with. And I know I've teased with people who are working with his work now that none of these shows would have happened probably if he were still in charge, which is kind of a sad thing to say. And the other thing, it also kind of makes me feel old having had all the work here, because I've been approached by people who have told me, oh, I posed for Gilbert in 1975. Do you have the picture of me? And I'll look at them and I said, well, what does it look like? Because of course, to us, we still look the same. But one guy came over and he'd been a, I don't know, a go-go dancer or something in those days when Gilbert painted him, but obviously had retired by now, 40 years later, 50 years later. But it's been interesting to meet people who, you know, when I was young, I couldn't imagine that older people had once been young. You know, when I was very young, I just didn't understand that. And so now I'm sort of getting in the reverse order. But it's really nice to see his work out there and integrated with work by other people who he probably would have loved to meet, and he probably would have talked to all of you and suggested mediums that you should use and color paint you should use and brands of paint. Every time I went to an art supply store where he worked, I usually came home with half a bag full of stuff he made me buy, and I still use it. I'm very grateful to him for that. So.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah, I got hoodwinked by him a couple times. I ended up buying some stuff that I didn't really use.
Well, he wanted you.
He was a good salesman.
Yeah.
So Charles, we have another of your drawings here.
Well, I think this one, how to explain this one? Well, this one is, again, this idea of between representation and abstraction. I like the way that one person spoke about the interruption. I'm always very conscious of you know, sort of the formal means by which I bring about an image, and I'm always focused on making that as important as the image that's evoked, where you almost look at both, where you're seeing the abstraction, you focus on line and texture as a thing itself, although it has a dual kind of function of representing the image. With this one too, I'm also playing, because I like to work with layering a lot and multiple iterations of like around a kind of common motif. And this is another one I worked a lot of different images around, and also brought into the computer and layered and brought it back out again into a drawing. So they get really processed in that way. I was also thinking about the implication of time and movement, you know, and how that adds to the sort of psychology of the presence, you know, the figure, the persona. And so, you know, it's that kind of opportunity to project, you know, these narratives and these feelings. Like I said, you know, I'm just kind of the stand-in, even though it's me, my persona, my face. But I like the drawing and the process lead me in directions, and so it becomes a way to project, you know, things that I'm concerned about and feelings at the moment. So.
The dog shows up in almost every piece.
Well, I noticed that a lot, that I do pull them in. There was a reference to Bonnard. Someone was talking, Phyllis was talking about the way that he used, and I do love Bonnard for that reason. The way that he pulls your eye from the center out to the edge, and the way he used the perimeter. But I always like the way Bonnard would, you know, include the dog in a lot of his paintings. And I thought the way that, you know, he included his wife is just another familiar presence that he would include. and it gets incorporated into the abstraction of his work, and and the sort of the idea of the narrative and the familiar, sort of setting. But then also, a dog also exists for me as a symbolic, presence. I don't know, there's something about it that I always like to include. I have a dog. I have had a dog for a pretty long time. I had dogs when I was growing up, and my father is crazy about dogs. So I don't know. It's the dogs have a multiple dimension for me for why they pop up in my drawings and paintings. I'm not always so sure why I keep doing that over and over again, but it's just something I like to do in the work.
Thank you, Charles.
Yep.
Mika, we have another of yours, a smaller piece here.
Yep. This one, I believe it's called CM with Glitter. This is a portrait of one of my friends who, like they always say, like certain people are like very photogenic. And this person, I used to paint her a lot, and I would say she's very painting-genic, but she's just like somebody who, every painting I used to do of her was just very, I don't know, it was very easy, and I didn't have to worry about capturing her. So again, it was just like another way to get lost in the medium. And this one, I think I had a lot of fun with. Like, there's a ton of glitter on that shoulder over there, and stripes, and I used markers. I used Crayons, which are like these water-soluble crayons. There's ink in there. There's acrylic. There's collage for the necklace here. At that time, I was experimenting a lot with. I liked the flatness of collage, and then also that it could have its own pattern to it. And I was particularly like interested in like African prints and things of that nature. And so my husband, who's also an artist, and I'm grateful because he just pretty much stocks up on like a bunch of different supplies, and I just get to have fun with them. So yeah, so that's this particular person. She had like just amazing eyes, and so I always like could connect that way, and then I would just kind of get lost into doing the painting. And I don't know for the other artists if there are other people who draw or creators or something on this call, but like for me, the way that I produce art, it's a lot of building up the painting, initially whatever you first put down, and then you have to like destroy it to kind of create, to expand it and make it better. And it's kind of almost like you're fighting yourself to get to a point where you're confident you can leave the painting so that it can stand on its own. But then at the same time, you're like, I know it's not a masterpiece, so I can keep going. I can keep destroying it and building it up, and destroying it and building it up. But it's scary when you're doing it. And that's something that I always kind of struggled, especially, while I was in, school and after, with is, being, confident that you can keep going and you can kind of, allow yourself the time and the patience to create, something that you can be proud of. And I find like a lot of people tend to get stuck in, they'll make something that's good, and, and they'll be unwilling to want to destroy it to kind of evolve it to the next step. And so that's something that's always, on my mind with painting, because I, can sometimes be a bit of a lazy painter. And sometimes I'll like just have to stop working on it and let it sit there for, a year or however, a couple months, or, maybe just a few days, until I can kind of become brave again and be willing to destroy something that, if there's a part that, worked. Yeah.
Thanks, Mika.
Mm-hmm.
So Ryan, we have two more of yours coming into view.
I see that. I see that.
You're joining us from Idaho today, correct?
Yes, I am. From lovely snowy Idaho. I had to slosh my way through the snow to my office so that you wouldn't hear the delightful screams of my 6 children in the background. So, so these 2 pieces, one's my oldest son on the top, and then the other one's my brother-in-law, Doug. And, you know, I think in both of these pieces, I'm sort of exploring similar ideas as the other 2, but the one on top is kind of part of a body of mixed media works that I started to embark on. You know, it could be argued that one of the most impactful kind of developments on the art of painting was the development of the photograph. And, you know, to this day, certainly if you were ever a student at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, there's sort of the potential to have uneasy encounters with people who have strong feelings about photography in general, about its use and purposes in the practice of an artist. And so anyway, this piece in the top, you know, photography fundamentally changed what painting was kind of about. You know, if you read Clement Greenberg, he's all about this idea that, you know, this really strong sense of formalism emerges about sort of analogous to the development of the photograph, that people suddenly realize that, hey, maybe painting isn't so much about the illusion. Maybe paint is about, maybe every painting, the subject of every painting is the paint or the materials or the mark making or the colors or the textures or all those like formal components, rather than trying to sort of subdue those components in order to trick the eye with illusion. And so, you know, that whole sort of phenomenon has always fascinated me. And so with this one on the top especially, it was part of a series where I actually started with photographs and then tried to sort of reclaim them or repurpose the photographs themselves back into painting or drawing. And so what I started off with is I'd print out these photographs of loved ones, and I began by sort of just breaking them. You know, so I'd use a little brayer, and I started by rolling maybe some sort of reddish pinkish ink over top of the surface. And it was interesting to me that these little pebbly marks that were laid down by a sort of loosely inked brayer, you know, just one pass, you know, begins to sort of break the image, and it stops reading immediately as being photographic with this first passive interruption. Then I'd sort of roll over it with a loose, dry brayer of black ink over top of that, and that would sort of stick to the peaks of those areas where there was kind of red ink. And then what I did over that is I kind of worked a kind of a Gauguin monotype process over top of that, where I sort of transferred some drawn marks directly over the image. And then in the end, I sort of developed some painted elements on the image as well. But, you know, that image of this set in particular sort of, I think, describes one of the avenues or threads I've pursued in this kind of curiosity about breaking the images or creating interruptions that kind of add potential interest, formal interest, but also entryways for the viewer to interact with the piece.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah.
So Phyllis, here you are. You definitely, you're drawing and you.
Right. Well, Mike, you asked me to do a self-portrait. I think when you and Tina were originally thinking about the show, the idea of self-portraits was important to you. I thought maybe even at first you were thinking of it being all self-portraits, but it turned out to be a mix. So I did the self-portrait because you asked. Over the course of my working life, I've done maybe only 5 or 6 self-portraits, but even I was happy to do it. And I did it with this Inuit sculpture that we're very, very lucky to have, who I call Hank. So I really wasn't alone. I'm very used to being with the model and having an interaction with the model. Though Hank actually didn't have very much to say. But he did give another level there of going back into space, which I really appreciated. And the other one is of my husband, and he has been a very long, I don't know, I'll say in parentheses, suffering model, though he doesn't say he suffers. But during this period of isolation, I don't remember how many pieces I've done of him now, just since last March to now, certainly 5 or 6, maybe 7. And that's been great. It's been great for me to have that. And an interesting thing, I mean, I find it interesting, is that when I first started to work during the pandemic, I left my studio, which is the 4th floor of our house, and it's a fabulous studio, and went back to working in the kitchen, which is where I spent my youth working, in my mother's kitchen, and then in the kitchen when I first had my own place. And I think it just put me more into a communal space, and that seemed important. So the one of Mickayel is in the kitchen, and on the wall we have some Mercer tiles. And I enjoyed having that balance of that tile butterfly with the head of Mickayel in that piece. Oh, and also I would like to say, since this is the last of mine, that obviously I draw with graphite, and through my life I've painted and drawn. So the last several years I'm only drawing, and it's really because I love drawing. I see it as very honest. It's certainly direct. And when Mika was talking about breaking down a painting and coming back, you can't do that in a drawing. The paper is only just so forgiving. I mean, I've tried. You could make only so many changes, and then the paper won't allow it. So either you have to stop or you leave it, and you get a history of the work. And that's another thing that I like about drawing, is that unlike paint, where you could kind of come over it, though sometimes you can see the changes, with a drawing you can't. And as you're showing on this one, you could see where I made changes, where the shoulder line changed. And I tell myself I like seeing that history. So maybe I'm rationalizing there, but the history of the drawing is very much there and can't be totally taken away.
Thank you, Phyllis.
Sure.
So Ryan, these are 2 digital pieces, correct?
Yeah, correct. You know, I sort of got into digital art almost by accident, sheer happenstance. You know, intrinsically, I'm a tinkerer. I'm sort of, you know, I sort of fancy myself like one of those, you know, one of those Enlightenment era kind of amateur, you know, natural philosophers or you know, astronomers or whatever, you know, people who had a lot of curiosity and we're just trying to figure out the world, right? And I feel like that's sort of my persona as an artist, is kind of a, you know, sort of a tinkerer. I try different things. I kind of try different tools, different approaches. I'm fascinated by materials. I do a whole variety of different techniques and approaches, both objective and non-objective, you know, traditional and non-traditional, including mixed media as well. So, you know, how I got into digital was kind of funny. I studied illustration in undergrad at the University of the Arts in Philadelphia there. And I guess the day where you were supposed to register for which track in the illustration program you're supposed to be involved in, I may have missed that day or missed the deadline. And so I intended fully to go into the traditional illustration track. I wanted to be painting and drawing and doing things like that. But, to my dismay, I walked in one day and they said, congratulations, you're in the digital track, because that's the track no one else wanted to be in. And that's the only one where there's seats left for you in the program. So I ended up getting sort of, stuck in this digital track, which at the time, I mourned it. I thought my life was over. But interestingly enough, the tools, digital tools, I gained certainly a lot of technological fluency with the tools of digital art making, software and hardware. And that kind of led me into sort of using digital as a form of creation that I could use for my illustrations. I moved from there to the academy for my graduate work, but I continued to tinker with digital as potentially a sort of fine art approach. And it's kind of been very interesting and fulfilling for me to kind of try and, create what I guess determine as sort of more fine art approaches with these sort of digital techniques that I learned as an illustrator. And the interesting thing is, by being a tinkerer and trying a bunch of different media, these things kind of talk to each other in terms of their approach. The way that you would build a digital piece like this is sort of potentially very different from how I might approach a painting or a drawing or even a mixed media work. But I found that as I was making digital works and this kind of concept of working in layers and sort of, removing things and adding things and sort of splicing things together, that was actually having an impact on my more traditional work as well. But these two pieces, the one on the left is my my lovely wife, and the one on the right is my younger brother, and that's part of this series that I kind of alluded to earlier, where I was representing members of my family as kind of people of potential historic significance or narrative significance. And so so anyway, so those are some thoughts about these works. But some of these other things I've been talking about, sort of the breaking of the image, the sort of creating interruptions and kind of developing sort of depth through layers, are all present here as well, because that's kind of an umbrella theme for all of my work, I think, at this point.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah.
This is another one of mine.
Yes.
This one is called Backup. It's a portrait of my husband, once again in the background, and myself in front. It's a lot of I just remember painting this. It was very slick. The surface, unlike some of the others, it's actually, I think it's MDF board. So I'm painting on a panel rather than on the canvas, which tends to be a lot more absorbent. So this painting, I actually had to stop a lot because the paint would get so luscious and thick that you'd have to, let it dry a little bit. And then what I like about it is because with acrylic, it actually dries a lot darker than what the color you initially paint down. So either you have to be conscious of that when you're doing the painting, or after it dries, you may have to go back and patch things. But I kind of like the slightly the differences that you get. So in this painting, it's a lot to have to do with light and color and playing with cools and warms. I also at the time had been looking at this Indian artist who was hardcore feminist, and she was all about painting her leg hair and her underarm hair, and I was like, that's great, I love that. I want to do this. And so I was like, I'm gonna paint my husband and myself in all our unflattering glory, and so that that's what I did. It's entitled Backup because that's just kind of how I think of him. And we're a mixed race couple. I'm Black, he's white. And so I feel like I feel like artists in general, you're kind of already in the other group, and you kind of have to be okay with your authentic self to some degree to be an artist or a creator. And so And that's something that I've kind of struggled with a bit. And in this painting, I guess I, wanted to capture the fact that you can, attract, disapproval or judgments, or you can, be less than perfect, and things don't have to be, they don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be clean. And in a way, like with this painting, it was kind of like making a mockery of that, because I remember when I was painting this, and I was almost getting frustrated at like the creaminess of the paint on the surface, and not wanting to like absorb. But then I was like, that's okay. Like that's how it's going to be. So I'm going to, utilize this and allow that to become part of this painting. And so it's almost like parts of it, like his arm, his hands, like, if I want to, I can paint, very, strictly, and have everything match up if it needs to be. But I was like, that's not what this painting, per se needs to be about. Yeah, and then it was just also playing with the different transparency. So some of the brown on there is like the brown of the board showing through. Some of it's like I would actually make mixed paint to try and get it to match. So it's just like an illusion that you can kind of, trick your eyes. So your eyes, drawn to a certain area, like on the shoulder there, but then you realize like, oh, that's paint there, and then that's just board. So yeah, so that's that painting. And then the one next to it, I think this is probably my final painting in this show. It's of my son, and it's called No Pepperoni. So he was younger here, but at the time, he still does this. He likes to eat the essence of pepperoni, if you will, on his pizza. So like he'll have us order pepperoni pizza, but then he'll pick all the pepperonis off, and he says he likes the flavor of like the pepperoni grease on his cheese pizza. So this painting is the only one I think in this group that's actually from a photograph. It's not from real life. I just thought, he looked super cute eating it, and I took a picture of it. And then I was like, oh, this is interesting with the chair and the bars. And there's, for those of you who visit, the Barnes Museum, there's this one lovely painting I can't remember the artist, which is gonna bother me, but it's above like one of the doorways, and it has this red chair. And it's, I just like the, how that reacts to everything else. And I wanted to kind of mimic that. So, that was kind of part of the focus of this painting. And then I had sketched it on here with marker, and then you can actually see it's bleeding through the paint a little bit. So, you get a sense of like the history and everything, and then playing with the flat shapes, and then, with the close cropping, so that, it almost looks like the table's just gonna slide down. And then I also included on the cup, there's like at the time he was very obsessed with stickers, and putting them all over our walls of our home and everything. And so I was like, you know what, I'm gonna put one of these in your painting, and just incorporated a little bit, painting over the edge. But yeah, so that's him enjoying some cheese pizza with the essence of pepperoni.
Thank you, Mika. Charles, we have one more drawing by you.
Yeah, this one, it's a little bit older piece. I mean, my son's like 23 now, so yeah, it's a bit of older piece. It's a situation where I mentioned earlier where, I see a scene, around me, some situation where a family member is sitting, or have a gesture that catches my eye, that seems to say something beyond the moment, that it sort of resonates with me in a way that I can't quite explain. So I grab a camera and take a picture of it, and that was the moment here. And I struggle with, well, what to do with this image. I feel that it has a kind of weight and presence, but what to do with it. So I play with different ways of incorporating that photographic image into something that was more inventive and more imaginative. And I played with different ways, but you know, it kind of alludes to the way I was working with the dog before as being a kind of like guide, a presence. And I was thinking about this as a dream that my son might have had. And this funny thing, sometimes I'll use my son as a stand-in for me. So it's sort of issues, things that I'm thinking about, or things that I'm feeling. I'll just grab, you know, family members as stand-ins, and I can kind of work my narrative in that way. So, and again, it all kind of comes together in a way that is a bit ambiguous to me as I look at it, in the sense that I can see it in multiple ways as I think about things I was going through. And I like that openness. I'm always suspect when I have like a clear, direct narrative or a statement I like to make. I like the, you know, I like it to be a little bit open, and as a way to almost open the door for people to project into it as well. So I enjoy that kind of ambiguity to the narrative, and I like to play with the space and, you know, the sort of confusion of things that are close and things that are far, and kind of compression of space. I'm very much kind of attracted to the way that Cubists and Picasso and Matisse, the way that they would compress space, yet it would still have a kind of illusionistic feeling to it. And I kind of pull that into my work a lot. Yep.
I find it a very enchanting image.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charles.
Yep.
Just before we open the floor to questions, we're going to show you two more Gilbert Lewis works that aren't in the show proper. One is a pastel or charcoal drawing, which is quite beautiful. And the other is a full figure gouache painting. Well, I'd like to thank all the artists for what they had to say. It's wonderful. So are there questions from anyone, artists to each other? You can feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
I had a question for Mr. Cooper. Are yours prints, or are these drawings, or?
Oh, all of these are drawings. Although I have had experience in the past with a lot of printmaking, and I like etching in particular, and it kind of got me into thinking about hatching a lot. So I incorporate hatching and mark making, you know, because I remember etching really forced me to think about the mark, because of the elaborate way you have to make a mark, and as you sort of rebite the plate and how the mark would change. I just grew, and this was my undergrad and graduate experience. I did a lot of printmaking, but now, you know, it's sort of hard to work that way. But I think it echoes in the way I think about making a drawing. So it's that sense of building up the image through a lot of marks, and keeping those marks very present in the final sort of effect. But no, they're all pencil drawings, in fact.
Anybody else?
Hi, I have a question for Ryan. The portrait of your wife, it almost looks like it could be collage, like it torn at parts. What medium did you use for that one?
Okay, so there are two images, my wife. You may be referring to the
The
digital
first
piece,
one that you showed, not the digital one.
not the digital one. Okay, yeah. No,
It
yeah,
had
so,
a feeling of torn paper, some of the background.
yeah, it looks that way, especially through the medium of, the worldwide interwebs. But, what it is paint. What it is paint, but it's been sort of carefully curated to sort of look like a collaged element. So, I'm glad that you're seeing it that way. But yeah, it's the circles on the face are painted very carefully. That sort of blocky, torn shape beyond her head is also I think I used tape. I used tape to kind of get that clean sort of paper-like edge on those three corners. And then the brush to make that sort of slightly more broken edge on the bottom. But yeah, so this is on paper. It's primed watercolor paper that I kind of developed the painting on, then I began sort of doing some drawing on, then I sort of added additional elements on top of that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I have one for Charles. Charles, I noticed that you have a lot of patterns in your work. And are they patterns that you go back to a lot? Are they familiar patterns that like they speak to you, some of those patterns?
Well,
Like the brick and things and blocks, and I noticed a lot of different patterns. I loved it.
yeah, sometimes I struggle in my work between. I was thinking about this as a kind of how can I put it? Enduring concern in the work. It seems like it's always on my mind when I'm sitting down to even make a painting. It's this contrast between the integrity of an object, that this figure ground, you have an object and you sort of build that object, give it a sense of volume and presence, or it's like the visual feel, as the other way to think about it, which I think of as more of the abstraction, thinking about the surface and putting the marks down and how they kind of create like this pattern that creates a kind of activity throughout the entire image. So I'm always thinking about that. And I do notice I keep coming back to kind of familiar strategies, that is coming out of the mark making, the repetitive quality of making a mark and sort of getting lost in that in a way that pushes my attention away from the sort of presence of thinking about figure ground. I also, again, I'm kind of fascinated with cubism and futurism and, artists who kind of work in that vein or come out of that. I like Matisse. I think of Diebenkorn, is kind of very much influenced by Matisse. And in a way that the mark making becomes a way to talk about surface, but then it also has a kind of illusionistic effect as well. And it creates, this feeling of rhythm across the surface. So I'm always looking for that. I work with layering. Sometimes layering kind of pushes me into developing patterns as well. But I think of it as emerging a lot out of just the process of making the work and how all the marks are kind of fusing together to sort of to push the attention around the work. So.
Thank you. Everyone's work was so wonderful. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Also, I just want to say to Mr. Cooper and also to Phyllis, you're with the graphite. I'm always impressed by people who do such detail-oriented work with graphite. My hands always cramp up when I'm doing that for long periods of time. So it's just it's pretty incredible.
Phyllis, can I ask, is that just one type of graphite you're using in your drawings?
Yes, I work with a graphite rectangle, and I use a 6B piece of graphite, and it's just a difference of pressing or building it up over the surface. But I've come to like that rectangle of graphite.
Is a 6B rectangle graphite the same as like a 6B pencil, or they're kind of similar depending on the maker?
It's like a 6B pencil. Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Any final questions for anybody?
I was wondering whether Charles, in your drawings, is there any, it's hard to tell online, is there any ink wash at all, or is it all just dry medium?
It's all graphite, working with pencil. And there's some shading. I was talking about the making the mark very explicit, but occasionally I do try to alleviate that with shading to kind of act as a foil for the mark making.
Right.
But yeah,
Hard to tell, yeah, because online it kind of, it's hard to figure out. That's
yeah, I can see that. Yeah, that's interesting.
Okay, we will end the talk proper. Thank you so much to the artists, and thanks to everyone for coming. It's been a very enjoyable experience. I hope you liked it. Yes, let's give the artists a big round of applause.